Okay, so in our previous meeting, I think we touched on we've been looking at the endocrine system, okay, in our previous meeting. And I think I made emphasis on the uniqueness of the endocrine system as compared to the nervous. Okay, now one of the foundational things that we mentioned, or one of the basic things that we mentioned, is that for something to be endocrine, it means that one way or the other, it has to release certain chemicals. Before that chemical gets to the target, it has to go through the blood. Is that okay? So I think in our initial discussions, we established that for something to be called an endocrine organ, it means some way, somehow, that organ has to release a certain chemical. Now, it could be that the chemical may even work on that same cell, or the chemical may even work on that same organ. But the principle is that before the chemical gets to the target, even if it is the same organ, it should get through the blood before it comes back. Okay, that is what we call endocrine principle. Okay, good. So we started looking at some of the endocrine organs. We looked at the major endocrine organs, and we look at the other endocrine organs, or what I call the minor endocrine organs. Now, when we say a major endocrine organ, these are more like organs that their primary functions are endocrine. So when we say a certain organ is a major endocrine organ, it means that organ, its primary function is endocrine. Is that okay? So for example, if you take an organ like the hypothalamus, the primary function of the hypothalamus is endocrine function. If you take an organ like the pituitary gland, its primary role in terms of anatomy and physiology is endocrine. If you take a gland like the pineal gland, it's endocrine. If you take a gland like the thyroid gland, the primary function is endocrine. Now, on the other hand, if you take organs like the heart has its primary role, but because one way or the other, the heart produces certain chemicals that follows the endocrine principle. Because of that, we classify the heart as an endocrine organ. Is that okay? If you take an organ like the liver, the primary function of the liver is for metabolic activities, metabolism. Okay, but some way, somehow, one way or the other, the liver also produces certain chemicals which follows the endocrine principle, meaning they have to get through the blood before they reach their targets. And because of that, we say the liver is also other endocrine organ. It's not a major. If you take an organ like the skin is not an endocrine organ. It's not, the primary function of the skin is not endocrine. But one way or the other, the skin also produces certain chemicals. Is that follows the endocrine principles. So because of that, we say the skin is other endocrine organs. Okay, so when we say other endocrine organs, we have the skin, we have the liver, we have the heart, we have the kidneys, we have adipose tissues, we have placenta, we have gastrointestinal tract. Is that so? We can ask you a question like, one of the following is a major endocrine. The following are all major endocrine organs, except then you see hypothalamus, pituitary gland, pineal gland, then the heart. Okay, so in this situation, the answer here is the heart. Okay, so the following are all considered major endocrine organs. Then A, the hypothalamus, B, pituitary gland, C, pineal gland. Then we will add the liver. Then here the answer is the liver. Is that okay? We can also say the following are all, one of the following is a major endocrine organ. One of the following is a major endocrine organ. Then I would have the liver, the skin, the heart, then the thyroid gland. What would be the answer? One of the following, the thyroid gland. Is that okay? The thyroid gland. Okay, so practically, at the basic level, at least know which ones are the major endocrine organs and know which ones are the minor or the other endocrine organs. Okay, and when we say an organ is other endocrine organ, it means that organ originally has its primary role. Just that some way, somehow, it produces certain chemicals that follows the endocrine principle. And because of that, we want to bring them and the endocrine system just because they follow the endocrine principles. Is that okay? Great. So by the chief organs in endocrine system, the major organs, we have the hypothalamus, we have the pituitary gland, we have the pineal gland, we have the thyroid gland, we have the parathyroid gland, we have the adrenal gland, we have the pancreas, specifically the endocrine pancreas. We have the ovaries, we have the testes, and we have the thymus. Is that okay? Now, another thing that I can do. Now, this table, study the table very well. Understand the dynamics of the table. Okay, there's a kind of table that I can use to examine you. One thing I can do from this table is that I can let you do a matching kind of question from this table. So I would have the hypothalamus. I will line up all the glands. Then I'll miss the locations. Then you will match the locations. Okay, basic anatomy. I'm not going to examine you on complex things because I'm looking at the level that you are. Is that okay? So I can just line up all the organs, probably like 5 of them. Then I will miss the locations on the right side. Then you will just match them. So hypothalamus, then you match. Hypothalamus in the brain, then you match. Pituitary, base of the brain, then you match. Is that okay? Pineal gland, deep in the brain, then you match. Thyroid gland, neck, in front of the trachea, then you do the matching correctly. Is that okay? Again, another thing that I can do is, if you take the hypothalamus, know the hormones that are produced by the hypothalamus. Is that okay? Have an idea the hormones that are produced by the hypothalamus. Okay. If we take the pituitary gland, have an idea the hormones that are produced by the pituitary gland. And I think in our previous meeting, we actively looked at the pituitary gland itself, the structure of the pituitary gland, all the cells inside the pituitary gland, and then the hormones that they produce. Is that so? Try and understand the dynamics, the table very well. This very table. Try and understand it very well. Okay, so at least when we say ovaries, you should know that the ovaries are in the pelvic cavity. So if I do matching, then you see ovaries, then you should know that, oh, ovaries, then I'm matching ovaries to the pelvic cavity. If you see testes, you should know that, okay, then testes, I have to match testes to the scrotum. Then you do the matching correctly. If you see thymus, thymus have to be matched to the upper chest or behind the sternum. Then you do the matching perfectly. Is that okay? Great. Let's go on to, so I think we started with hypothalamus. Okay, good. And one of the major things that I mentioned about the hypothalamus is the fact that it accounts for less than 1% of the total brain mass. Okay, and we came to understand that the hypothalamus is very small. Is that okay? Very, very small in size. Because if you look at its percentage relative to the brain mass, you could see it's very small, 1% of the total brain mass. That tells you the hypothalamus is a very small organ, okay? But it plays a very crucial role, okay? Looking at how small it plays a very crucial role because you see, this is an organ that is the master regulator. Now remember, the hypothalamus is not the master gland. It's like you have a company. Usually every company, they have the manager, but the owner too may be there. The hypothalamus is like the owner. Okay. There are times that you hear of a company, the manager or the CEO is there, but the company sometimes have an owner, the owner himself. The hypothalamus is like the owner of the entire endocrine system. And usually, you see, for those of you who have worked in companies before, you appreciate this. Sometimes if you are working in a company as a worker, you don't get the opportunity to all the time talk to the owner. It's the manager that communicates to you. That's how the hypothalamus is. The hypothalamus only communicates to the pituitary gland. Okay. So the hypothalamus only communicates. It does not communicate directly to any other organ. It only communicates directly to the pituitary gland. So even if the hypothalamus wants to communicate to the ovaries, it will send a message to the pituitary gland, then the pituitary gland will be the one to communicate to the ovaries. That's how the hypothalamus works. So the hypothalamus do not communicate directly with any other organ or any other gland. It only communicates directly to the pituitary gland. Then the pituitary gland is more like the intermediary gland that releases information to the other organs, the other endocrine glands in the body. And we discussed that the hypothalamus is connected to the pituitary gland. Do you remember? We discussed the hypothalamus is connected to the pituitary?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Right. So that means that the pituitary gland is in two parts. Now, the first question, how does the hypothalamus connect to the anterior pituitary? How does the hypothalamus connect to the anterior pituitary?
Through blood vessels.
Through blood vessels. Yes, through blood vessels. And so because of that connection, what is the other name for the anterior pituitary? Yes, because of that connection with blood vessels. What is the other name for the anterior pituitary?
Adenohypophysis.
Good. Adenohypophysis. Yes, that's why we call it adenohypophysis. Okay, so because of its connection with the anterior pituitary through blood vessels, we call it adeno. If you say something is adeno, meaning it is related or associated with a vessel, that's the meaning in anatomy. Okay, means some way, somehow, that thing is related to a vessel. Is that okay? So the connection between the hypothalamus and the anterior pituitary is through blood vessels. Because of that, the anterior pituitary, we also call it adenohypophysis. Now, it also has a connection with the posterior pituitary. Now, how does the hypothalamus connect to the posterior pituitary?
Through nerve fiber.
Good. Through nerve fibers. Is that okay? And because of that, what is the other name for the posterior pituitary?
Neurohypophysis.
Good. Neurohypophysis. Neurohypophysis. Is that okay? Then another thing that you have to remember, which most of you have not thought of, is that the hypothalamus, when it comes to the connection between, hypothalamus produces certain hormones. The hypothalamus, it has some hormones that it produces. Now, when the hypothalamus produces hormones, and the hormones have to go to the anterior pituitary, listen carefully, it releases the hormones. Let me take that again. If the hypothalamus produces hormones, and the hormones have to go to the anterior pituitary, it actually releases the hormones through the blood that is connecting it to the anterior pituitary. But then if the hypothalamus produces hormones and it has to go through to the posterior pituitary, it sends them. They are two different things. Now, if you don't get these basics, it will be hard for you to appreciate the relationship between hypothalamus and pituitary. So it's like, for example, so the two hormones, the oxytocin and antidiuretic hormone, when they produce, they don't release. When they produce, they send them there so that the posterior will be the one to release. But then when it comes to its connection with the anterior pituitary, when they produce, they release them there, meaning the hypothalamus itself releases those hormones for them to go to the anterior pituitary. But when they produce the ADH and oxytocin, they don't release them. It's like they send them there so that when we say they send them there, if they release into the blood. In endocrine system, when we say release, we use the word release, meaning you are taking it into the blood. But the hormones that the hypothalamus produce, which go to the anterior pituitary, they release them, meaning they go into the blood before they get into the anterior pituitary. But then the hormones that are from the hypothalamus going to the posterior, they send them, meaning they don't go through the blood. That's why that one is a neural connection. They use the nerve fibers. So get that basics. So let me take that for the last time. The hypothalamus produces certain hormones that goes to the anterior pituitary alone. Now, those hormones, when they produce, the hypothalamus themselves, they release them into the blood. That's why we use the word release. But then it also produces some two hormones, the ADH and the oxytocin. Those ones, when they produce, they don't release. Now, why are we using the word release? We use release in endocrine system when something is being moved into the blood before it gets to the target. That's why when we use release. So the hypothalamus, when it produces the antidiuretic and oxytocin, they do not release. Oh, why are we saying they do not release? They don't go through the blood before they get to the posterior pituitary. So we use the word descend them. Okay, so descend. Okay, the moment you use release, it means that you are telling us they are going into the blood. So when the hypothalamus is producing a hormone and is going to the anterior pituitary, they release them, meaning they take them to the blood before they get there. But when the oxytocin and antidiuretic are being produced, they don't release. Rather, they send them through the nerve fibers so that they get to the posterior pituitary. Then the posterior will be the one to release them. So the posterior will store them temporarily. Then they would be the one to release those hormones. Is that okay? So in future, if you're explaining to someone, you say that, okay, so the hypothalamus has some hormones they produce. Majority of the hormones they produce, they release them to the anterior pituitary. They release them, meaning they release them into the blood for them to go and work on the anterior pituitary. But there are some two hormones that they produce, they don't release. They send them through the nerve fibers before they get to their target. Is that okay? So get the two difference. Is that okay? So if we ask you which gland releases antidiuretic, hormone and oxytocin, the answer you are going to say is posterior pituitary. Okay, which gland releases the antidiuretic hormone and oxytocin? The answer you say is posterior pituitary. If we ask you which gland produces, is that okay? Which gland produces antidiuretic hormone and oxytocin? The answer you are going to write is hypothalamus. It's the hypothalamus that produces them. Now, if we ask you, we write these statements. Hypothalamus releases antidiuretic hormone and oxytocin. It's a false statement. The hypothalamus does not release those hormones. Once you use the word release in endocrine, you are telling us that something is being sent to the blood. The hypothalamus does not release, they send. So if oxytocin and antidiuretic have to go to the posterior, hypothalamus sends them or they transport. Okay, it's better. Don't use release when we come to ADH and oxytocin. They rather send them there. Is that okay? Good. So once you use send, then we now understand that in endocrine, if you are using send, then it means they are not through the blood vessels. Okay, so that we will understand you. Okay, and I also mentioned that we have a pathway of connection between the hypothalamus and then the anterior pituitary. What is the name of the pathway connecting the hypothalamus to the anterior pituitary? What's the transport system?
The hypophyseal portal system.
The hypophyseal portal system. So if we ask you this in exams, okay, what is the name given to the pathway or the transport pathway between the hypothalamus and the anterior pituitary? Simple. You go and circle hypophyseal portal system. Simple as that. When we ask you, okay, what is the name given to the pathway of connection? And again, I can also define the pathway. Then you tell me the connection. Okay, so I can say, okay, the hypophyseal portal system help to transfer hormones directly from the anterior pituitary, between the anterior pituitary and hypothalamus. Is that okay? Then I'll shorten, then I'll say, okay, the hypophyseal portal system help with the transport of hormones between anterior pituitary and then hypothalamus, posterior pituitary, hypothalamus, anterior pituitary, thyroid gland. I'll add additional, options. Okay, so once you see hypophyseal portal system, is the transport pathway between the hypothalamus and the anterior pituitary. Once you see hypothalamo-hypophyseal tract, the transport pathway between the hypothalamus and the posterior pituitary. Is that okay? Good. Then, so let's look at hypothalamic hormones. Now, this table, study this table very well and make sure you master this table. Is that okay? Master this table very well. Okay, so let's look at the hormones. So these are the hormones produced by the hypothalamus. Thyrotropin releasing hormone, corticotropin releasing hormone, gonadotropin releasing hormone, growth hormone releasing hormone, growth hormone inhibiting hormone, that's somatostatin, prolactin inhibiting hormone, dopamine, melanocyte stimulating hormone. Okay, now on a basic level, I can just ask you, write 3 hormones or write 5 hormones produced by the hypothalamus on a simple level. Okay, write 5 hormones. So simple, you just write thyrotropin releasing hormone, corticotropin releasing hormone, JNRH. And remember, these nomenclatures are accepted in anatomy. You can write the initials, it will be marked just like someone who will write it in full. They are accepted nomenclatures. So if you want to write TRH, it's accepted. It's accepted everywhere. Even on the internet, if you write TRH, it will come as thyrotropin releasing hormone. They are accepted nomenclatures. Okay, so instead of writing it in full, if you want to learn using the initials, it's accepted. You can learn it using the initials. But fine, if you want to master with the full names too, that is great. Okay, good. So know that TRH, thyrotropin releasing hormone, is a hormone from the hypothalamus. Corticotropin releasing hormones is a hormone from the hypothalamus. Gonadotropin releasing hormone is a hormone from the hypothalamus. Growth hormone releasing hormone is a hormone from the hypothalamus. Prolactin inhibiting hormone is a hormone from the hypothalamus. Okay. Melanocyte stimulating inhibiting hormone is a hormone from the hypothalamus. And ADH is also a hormone from the hypothalamus, as well as oxytocin. Okay, now look, the first one, you see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. The first 7 hormones, when they are being produced, they are released to the anterior pituitary. Let me take it again. The first 7 hormones, so the thyrotropin releasing hormone, corticotropin releasing hormone, gonadotropin releasing hormone, growth hormone releasing hormone, growth hormone inhibiting hormone, prolactin inhibiting hormone, melanocytes inhibiting stimulating hormone. The first 7 hormones, when they are being produced, they are released to the anterior pituitary. Now, the last 2, ADH and oxytocin, when they are being produced, they are sent. They are 2 different things. And I've explained the difference between the release and the sent. When we use release, it means it's going to the blood. And it's because of the release factor. That is why the hypothalamus is an endocrine organ. If it was just about the sent, it will not be endocrine, because the sent is through nerve fibers. Is that okay? It's because of the other side, which is the release into the blood to the anterior. That is why hypothalamus is actually is fulfilling endocrine function. Is that okay? So the first 7, when they are being released, they are going to the anterior pituitary. Is that okay? And in the anterior pituitary, remember I told you in the anterior pituitary, we have cells there. In the anterior pituitary, we have cells. You remember we established this principle that endocrine hormones, they are target specific. So when an endocrine organ or gland releases the hormone, so that hormone will target only specific cells in the body. So you see this cell, thyrotroph cells, corticotroph cells, gonadotroph cells, somatotroph cells, lactotroph cells, melanotroph cells. All these are cells within the pituitary gland, specifically the anterior pituitary. Okay, so the thyrotroph cells, the corticotroph cells, the gonadotroph cells, the somatotroph cells, the lactotroph cells, the melanotroph cells, these are all cells in the anterior pituitary. Is that okay? So look at how it works. So when the hypothalamus releases the thyrotropin releasing hormone, this hormone only targets the anterior pituitary. When it gets to the anterior pituitary, the only cell in the anterior pituitary that has receptors for it is the thyroid cells. So it will go and wake the thyroid cells up. Then the thyroid cells will now go and produce the thyroid stimulating hormone. Then this thyroid stimulating hormone will also go to the thyroid gland and go and wake the thyroid gland up that start producing T3 and T4. And I think I demonstrated that in class for you to see how it works.
Yes, sir.
Okay.